Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to the second webinar of our series focusing on climate migration and displacement. And today we'll be focusing on rural and urban perspectives on climate migration. And we have two speakers for you today. Mr. Shamsuddoha, I call him Doha. I think that's the short form that everyone uses, who's the Chief Executive Center for Participatory Research and Development. He's from Bangladesh. And we have Dr. Sandra Piesik, who's the Director Architect of 3 Ideas BV. So those are the two speakers for us today. So I would first put a brief on the two speakers for today. Okay, so while I give you the guidelines on how we work on the webinar, you could have a look at our speakers' bios. They've worked a lot on different aspects related to migration and human settlements, and then the urban and rural related topics and climate change. So they would give a brief introduction to themselves before they speak. Just for you to know, we'll have two speakers. We'll have them speaking first, and then we will open the floor for questions. So please hold your questions until then. And then for 30 minutes, we'll have a question and answer.
Thank you very much. So a very good morning or good afternoon to you all, and thank you for your invitation. It's a pleasure to join you on a webinar on urban-rural linkages. I had a privilege to work on this topic since 2004 as a researcher, but as well as a contributor to various policy frameworks initiated by UN Habitat, UNCTD, and we have presented the case studies for urban-rural linkages also on COP series on UNFCCC. I think I could hear some background noise. I don't know whether the mics could be switched off for a moment. Thank you, if that's possible. Before I start, I just wanted to say that we're living in a really challenging times. I wanted to pay my respects to all that lost their lives because of COVID-19, and that's obviously connected. It's a story that is connected to urban-rural linkages one way or another. And effectively, we're also experiencing a huge uprising with the Every Life Matter movement, and all of this is inducing a level of human suffering. So rural-urban migration, though at some stage could be positive, because not all migration is negative, there is an element of human suffering in it as well. So you could imagine the general statistics are telling us that every day the 34,000 people around the world flee their homes to escape famine, poverty, and war. And to speak very briefly about urban-rural linkages and the massive work that has been done on this topic through various scholars and UN agencies, I wanted to use a metaphor of domino effect, because I think effectively rural-urban migration is a form of domino effect. And a definition of domino effect is a chain reaction, is a cumulative effect produced when one event sets off a chain of similar events. And I wanted to use this metaphor for urban-rural linkages because theoretically we could imagine that perhaps a climate migration, lack of ability to grow crops, is initiating the migration to cities and urban areas. But this is just an illusion that this migration finishes actually in the cities themselves. Quite often, this migration continues to other continents and other countries. So it is a global problem that is prevailing, and I think is almost as important when it comes to risks as climate change problem itself. The general statistics are telling us that half of the urbanization growth in the world results from internal rural to urban migration and area reclassifications. And because cities are growing and the population of the cities is growing as well. Today, 55% of the world population live in cities. Prediction is that this will grow in 2050 to 68%. Now, the topic of rural-urban migration has been part of developmental studies for a very long time. I wanted to refer here to E.T. Schumacher and a very beautiful book called Small is Beautiful, who spoke about the tensions between rural-urban areas back in 1971, 49 years ago. He spoke that the health of cities depends on the health of the rural areas. And prior to climate change movement being so present in multilateral dialogues, at the time, the problem with rural-urban migration was effectively poverty, was lack of jobs. So Schumacher advocated a holistic concept to development whereby schools, various type of employment, various aspects of manufacturing would be taken into consideration to retain population in rural areas. And this is something that we've been engaging with, as you could see, for almost 50 years. I wanted to offer three possible solutions that could enhance or reduce rural-urban migration. The topic is massive. I've written a policy on this topic for UNCCD, and you're welcome to have a look at that for Global Land Outlook. And as well, UN Habitat has been writing lots of papers and recommendations. I had the privilege to be part of some of these. So this is just taking three aspects that I feel might be relevant for debate and engaging in a dialogue with yourselves today. So the first aspect I wanted to highlight as a solution to possible reduction of rural-urban migration is the issue of understanding of food chain ecosystems. And I think this is really, really critical and important because thematically, we talk about food systems as part of rural entities and as part of rural areas. Farming and agriculture indeed happens in rural areas, but quite often processing, storage, retail and food services are located in cities. So I think that the first bridging of reduction of migration process is understanding where the food is being produced and the connectivity of these food chain, in particular, to cities. Now, the other aspect that I think is also really important is the issue of agricultural productivity. I mean, this is not my area of expertise, but I know that monoculture causes huge problem for small farmers and smaller effectively for smaller livelihoods. And the issue here is effectively a story that I remember hearing from a mayor from West Africa, is that the monoculture causes land degradation. For example, in sub-Saharan Africa, we then have people migrating due to lack of jobs and effectively an arable soil up north towards Mediterranean, and sometimes these people, due to lack of jobs, due to lack of opportunities, are ending up involved in terrorist organizations. So there is a huge knock-off effect on migration, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, and precisely on urban-rural migration. Another solution that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention, I think, is effectively new green jobs. So accordingly to the International Labour Organization, from jobs perspectives, environmental sustainability is critical. In fact, the increasing frequency and intensity of natural disasters associated with human activity have lowered productivity. And effectively, currently, around 1.2 billion jobs rely directly on the effective management of natural resources, which includes agriculture, fishing, and forestry. ILO expects that the global employment growth services and waste management will create around 45 million jobs. Now, this is huge opportunity to use local resources byproducts of agriculture sector for this economic diversification, for creation of new jobs. There is a huge potential behind circular economy, and I also think this is a moment for implementation of technology development and transfer, adaptation of indigenous technologies, and Article 5, Article 10 of Paris Agreement here play a huge role. But to pull off some of these potentials, we really need bioregional collaboration, which is probably critical, because upscaling of some of these technologies, local technologies in rural areas, will take time, it needs massive resources, and I think that no country can actually deliver this on their own. Which brings me to the third solution, effectively climate change treaties. I'm a great believer in Rio Conventions. I don't really think that we need a new Green Deal, because Paris Agreement is the deal, SDGs are the deal. And I really think we need to deliver on what has been committed historically and in the past. And I think the value of these documents and these treaties is effectively in the fact that they are holistic. And they look at the developmental issues in a holistic way, which I think in this case, in the case of rural-urban linkages, is really, really important. And this, in addition to various initiatives, as I earlier mentioned, initiated by UN Habitat, UNCCT, and other UN agencies. For those that are working on SDGs in particular, I wanted to pay attention to SDG 11, which is sustainable communities in cities. But there is a very interesting target that is relevant for our discourse today, target 11.A. And we could see support positive economic, social, and environmental links between urban, peri-urban, and rural areas by strengthening national and regional development planning. Now, I think the emphasis here, at least for in terms of potential for change and for growth, is a peri-urban area. This is the area where the migration arrives. This is the area where cities grow, and this is the connection area between urban and rural areas, sometimes defined as 25 kilometers outside the city boundaries. So the metropolitan areas play an enormous role and have a huge potential for probably developmental change that can happen. And COVID-19 obviously brought an opportunity to rethink our developmental patterns, whether it is to do with economy, whether it is to do with food production. I think we had huge ambition, even just up to a few weeks ago, to speak about Build Back Better and a greener cover, and we all believe in it. But the truth is that the countries are opening up from lockdown very quickly. I'm based in Amsterdam. The city was opened up within hours. So what we can really build back better, how we can build back better, it remains a big question, and I think that we do need to come back to these previous documents I've mentioned in Paris Agreement and SDGs to try to focus on the implementation in the first instance. This is an example of a solution that I have provided for rural-urban linkages for the UNCCT Convention, and effectively I shaped the policy around natural, human, social, manufactured, and financial capitals, because I think that every place on the planet needs a bit of both to function. We work in thematic silos. We either work on water or on food or on transportation. I think that having these bits together makes a place successful and resilient in the future. And finally, just to conclude, I wanted to share with you a film that I watched over the weekend in preparation for this webinar, which is called Human Flow, by acclaimed Chinese artist Ai Weiwei, and I highly recommend for all of you to watch. It is downloadable from YouTube. And urban-rural migration sometimes can become a refugee challenge. People are refugees for around 25, 26 years. It is, unresolved human story until today, and maybe strengthening rural areas and providing jobs opportunities there would help into this really huge and important global problem. I also, to conclude, wanted just to also mention about the Resilience Frontiers program that we've been both involved with, as I think this is something really interesting and promising in terms of this holistic aspect and thinking about urban rural areas as one ecosystems, and likewise as our own planet as one ecosystem. So thank you for now. I don't know whether you could hear me okay, but
we heard you very well, and thank you for the very colorful presentation. I really like the slides.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, so a lot of information there, a lot of things, global perspectives. And I actually forgot to introduce myself because I've been doing this a few times. So I'm Vasita Vijayanayak, for those who haven't seen us on our webinars at SLYCAN Trust. I'm the Executive Director of SLYCAN Trust. And we have regular webinars on different thematic issues. And this is on migration and different perspectives relating to migration that we do. So the next speaker we have now on video and on mic. So Sandra and I are going to switch off our mics and videos and pass the floor to Doha to speak on Bangladesh and the experiences on migration.
Yes, I think I could start now. Welcome to my presentation. My name is Shamsuddoha. I work for a research organization in Bangladesh. It's called CPRD, Center for Participatory Research and Development. It's a kind of policy think tank, we can say. Though we do policy research on displacement, migration, and other issues, but also do local level action researches and try to link local level activities or vulnerabilities to the national and global policy stakeholders. So today I'm going to discuss cause and consequences of climate-induced displacement and migration in Bangladesh, and this presentation is based on a study we conducted in several areas in Bangladesh. We call it climate hotspot. So we did this study in five districts in Bangladesh. You could find the areas where we implemented this study. It's a kind of mix of climate hotspots. We choose coastal areas. This is Khulna and Patuakhali, and also river erosion prone areas. This is Faridpur and Shirazganj, and Nogan. This is a kind of drought prone area. So it's a mixed kind of climate hotspot, coastal areas, flood prone areas, and also drought prone areas. I already talked about this. Yes. And in the areas, actually, we try to find out the pattern of disasters. We may call it climate change induced disasters or natural disaster, and the changing pattern of disaster in those areas. So particularly in the Nogar areas, we call it drought prone areas. We find that this area is particularly prone to drought, but increasingly, and in the recent year, maybe last decade, this area also being affected by dense fog, and dense fog is a new phenomenon, and also erratic rainfall. And erratic rainfall to some extent is causing localized flood. So flood was not a common disaster in that area, but recently due to impacts of climate change and due to erratic rainfall, this area is suffering from local level flood. We call it localized flood, and also storm and hail. And the new inclusion is dense fog. The next area, Faridpur, this is particularly vulnerable to flood because It's a river basin area, and we have to receive huge amount of precipitation during monsoon, and also receive huge amount of upstream water. So all the waters drain out to the Bay of Bengal through Faridpur and other district, adjacent district. So monsoon flood is a common in that district, and monsoon flood also trigger river erosion. So two major disaster, this is monsoon flood and river erosion, and associated with these two disaster, recently those districts are being affected by dense fog, and also to some extent droughtiness, and also erratic rainfall. So you see the change of disasters or changing pattern of disaster in the Faridpur district, I mean the flood prone area. So the climate change and the impacts of climate change not only intensifying the current disaster or the as usual disasters, but also intensifying the impacts of other disaster and also introducing new disaster. This is Shirazganj. The scenario of Shirazganj and the earlier districts is more or less similar. This is flood and river erosion is common. The other than of two disasters of monsoon flood and river erosion, dense fog, and also drought, erratic rainfall is increasing in those areas. So you see the new pattern of disasters are coming up, and we are not prepared with this new pattern of disasters. And this new pattern of disasters are causing many problems in the livelihood activities like agricultural production activities, and also forcing people to be displaced and migrated. I'm coming to the causes of displacement migration later. Just I am trying to highlight the changing pattern of disaster right now. In the coastal districts, in Patuakhali, coastal districts are particularly historically affected by cyclone. Frequency and intensity of cyclones are increasing. There are several studies in Bangladesh. But tidal flood is becoming a common phenomenon in the coastal districts. And tidal flood is increasing due to sea level rise and also strengthening of tidal fluctuations. And this also to some extent related to the coastal infrastructure, because coastal infrastructures are not prepared for the new types of disasters. So when a sea level is going up and the tides are becoming more stronger and energetic, the coastal embankment cannot protect them. So that's why the coastal districts like Patuakhali is affecting by more tidal floods. Salinity intrusion is associated with tidal floods, and also to some extent tropical cyclone, because when cyclone water comes in, this water cannot drain out properly, and the water logging or logging of saline water is causing salinity intrusion. Salinity intrusion is also related to sea level rise. So the salinity intrusion has two kind of implication. One is slow process. Slow process is related to sea level rise, but it also sometimes causes sudden impact when saline water comes to the freshwater areas with tropical cyclone or tidal surge. Besides this, excess rainfall is also becoming a dominant disaster event in the coastal districts. Similar to this, the Khulna, this is also another coastal district. This is also prone to tropical cyclone, tidal floods, salinity, and also river erosion. Dense fog also, some people also said that dense fog is also increasing in those areas in the winter season. I should make a bit clarification on dense fog. Dense fog is a major or common phenomenon in the winter season, but in particular areas and particular context, the duration of fogging is increasing. Before that, maybe dense fog would continue 1 or 2 days or even a day, but in the recent phenomena reveals that the fogging condition or dense fog continues maybe 7 days or more than that. When dense fog continues, this dense fog have adverse impact on seedlings, rice seedlings, and also vegetable cultivation. So these are also affecting agricultural activities in different way. So if I explain the changing scenario of the disaster pattern, so we are seeing that new disasters are coming up. This is dense fog, drought. Drought was not a disaster in Bangladesh, and salinity increase. And the disaster department, the department or ministry that deals with disaster, they don't consider those events, new event like dense fog, drought, and salinity as a disaster event. So they put less concern on those. On the other hand, Bangladesh has good preparation or institutional strength for dealing or addressing sudden onset event, particularly tropical cyclone and monsoon flood. But we are not prepared to address erratic rainfall, excess rainfall, and also storm and hail and tidal floods. And erratic rainfall and excess rainfall is causing it's causing floods. We call it everyday disasters, and also localized flood. So localized event sometimes is ignored by the national policy stakeholders, because national policy stakeholders and national institutions are really concerned about the mega disaster events, national events, and also international community. They are prepared particularly for tropical cyclone, and they are sensitized for tropical cyclone and mega scale monsoon floods, not for the localized climatic event or disaster events. And these localized events are becoming a dominant factor or prominent disaster in particular areas, and their frequency and intensity are increasing, and there are a clear link between climate change and those disasters, particularly salinity intrusion, tidal fluctuation, dense fog, and also erratic rainfall. They are particularly closely linked to the impacts of climate change. And I can elaborate just two examples how the slow onset events or new events are affecting people's livelihood. One example from the northern part of the country is from Nogon district, and there are drought problem there, and these drought nets are causing impact to the agricultural production. So if there is drought, it reduces soil moisture content. So if soil moisture content reduces, then there is no potential use of agriculture. So agricultural lands are converting to the mango orchard, and mango orchard require less moisture and also less labor. So agriculture activities could accommodate more labor than the mango orchard. So when agricultural lands are converting to the mango orchard are requiring less labor, so more people are becoming unemployed, and those people are migrating to the urban areas for their livelihoods, and we call it seasonal migration, economic migration. So distantly, we cannot make a clear linkages between climate change and those displacement migration, but if we link these two, how this and why these agricultural lands are converting to the mango orchard, then we can find a linkage that due to less of moisture content in water in land, then lands are converting to the mango orchard, and that's why people are becoming jobless and they are migrating. So there is a clear linkage between climate change and also migration. On the other hand, dense fog is causing harm to the agricultural productivity and also causing harm to the local textile industries. So in that district, there are many local textile industries, and local textile factories are very, these are very tiny, and the structure is not that robust. So when they keep the windows and the doors of these factories open, then dense fog come into those small factories, and it creates a kind of clogging to the textile dyeing and cause problem to the textile weaving. So if dense fog continues, then the local textile factories should stop their production maybe for 7 days or 15 days. So it causes their livelihood hamper. So these are the linkages. I mean, how both slow onset events or sudden onset events are forcing people to be displaced and migrated. But when we talk talk to the global or national policy stakeholder, then they said that all the migrants or migration or displacement is related to the economy, because they cannot continue their livelihood activities in the local areas, so they're forced to migrate it. But if we look into the causes why local economy are collapsing, there is a clear linkages of climate change induced disaster. For instance, slow-onset events, salinity is affecting food, water, and health insecurity, and people are performing routine economic migration. On the other hand, sudden onset events like cyclone and floods, they are destroying habitats, household, and assets. So people are forced to displaced temporarily, and at a certain point of time, they are being forced to migrate. So though all are economy migration for livelihood opportunities, but the livelihood opportunities are becoming collapsed due to impacts of climate change and climate-induced disasters. And these are triggering rural urban migration. This is a kind of flowchart. I try to make it clear that how the event and process are forcing people to be migrated. You see the upper row is slow onset event, drought, sea level rise, salinity intrusion, temperature rise, precipitation, etc. So when the slow onset events affect people's livelihood, they try to cope with the alternative livelihood options. If they cannot cope, or if they cannot find out alternative livelihood options, then they perform routine economic migration, and at a certain point of time, they migrate with whole family. And this migration is an interplay between pull factor and push factor. So when push factor works, when push factor is severe, then they undertake routine economic migration, and if they find a good neighborhood or good circumstances in urban areas by dint of pull factors, then they take permanent economic migration. On the other hand, sudden onset events like cyclone, river erosion, floods, they force people to be displaced, and that displaced is temporary, and then displacement is under a condition that if the local situation revive, then they will go back to their homes of origin. But if they cannot get back to their home, then they undertake permanent or temporary migration. So all the things, I mean, events, sudden onset and slow onset events, they trigger different kind and different natures of migration. This is a combination of seasonal migration, routine economic migration, then temporary migration, then permanent migration. But some people cannot migrate. They become trapped to the situation, and they become trapped, and they become more exposed to the vulnerable situation. They are women, they are children, they're elderly people, and they're disabled people. So they cannot migrate for many different reasons. And one factor is that maybe they cannot get a suitable job in the urban areas, or they don't have any capacity, not capacity, they are not that, they don't consider themselves to get a good job in urban areas. That's why they prefer to stay back, not migrate, and they become trapped to the situation. This is an explanation of the previous slide, that sudden and dramatic onset events, they particularly force people to be displaced. On the other hand, the slow onset events, they force people to undertake seasonal migration or routine economic migration, and then undertake permanent migration. I explained this maybe. Yes. So the things we often ignore in relation to displacement and migration, this is a clear picture that people are displaced or migrated from one place to another place, maybe from rural areas, they find their place to the urban areas. But some people are really ignored. This is trapped population. Nobody talks about the trapped population, not the policymakers, how to support them and how to reduce their vulnerability, because they are not trapped only, they also exposed to the new vulnerabilities and more vulnerabilities. And they're also the vulnerable community of the society. On the other hand, we also don't consider the residual impact. I mean, when a sudden onset affect a community, it also causes some residual impact in terms of environmental degradation and also conflict, and also other socioeconomic consequences. So we also really should look into the residual impact of both slow and sudden onset event. Cross-border migration, this is another concern. And in a study, we found that many people from the coastal areas, particularly Khulna areas, southern part of the country, they undertake routine economic migration from Khulna to West Bengal, because there is close proximation, and there is also a strong pull factor, because many people from Khulna, they live in West Bengal, and the wage rate in West Bengal is higher than Bangladesh. So that's why they prefer to go to the West Bengal, and when they migrate to the West Bengal, they are treated as illegal migrants, and they are not entitled to the basic services like health, education, and other entitlements. So this is a major concern, how we could address this cross-border migration, or how could we ensure basic services, particularly rights-based services to those cross-border migration. One point is clear: migration could be illegal, but no person is illegal. When a person migrates from Bangladesh to India, this is also a legal person. So he or she should be treated equally as a citizen of India. Or if a person from India migrates to Bangladesh, he or she also should be treated as treated with equal opportunities of Bangladeshi citizens. So we also should look into this. The other thing what is often ignored, this is trapped in inhuman condition, trafficking and sexual abuse. This is both in terms of cross-border migration and also internal migration. When a woman or adolescent girl find her place in urban slums, then often he or she face many social discrimination, economic discrimination also, and also suffer from sexual abuse. There is also risk of trafficking of women and children. Sometimes they also face death and torture when they try to cross this border. And there are many evidences of both people who migrate from Bangladesh for economic reason and find their place and utilize the illegal boat route and helplessly die. There are many evidence also. We also should address this under the context of human rights, and also violation of human rights in general. We have to address this discrimination and deprivation, and also cultural extinction is another hidden consequences of displacement and migration, what we should also discuss or highlight in our policy discourse. There are a few policy suggestions in terms of our findings and cause and consequences. There are many drivers of migration, but when we talk to the policymakers, they try to figure out that this is economic migration, not really climate change induced migration, or the migration is not forced by climate change. So yes, there are many drivers of migration, but climate change is becoming a dominant factor to influence all the drivers, to influence even economic drivers. The another driver, this is governance. Sometimes failure of governance in the local areas also forces people to be displaced and migrate and migration. Governance in terms that the state authority don't do their proper activities in proper way, don't support the vulnerable people in the local context, and also the local institutions are not proactive or are not delivering their services to the climate change risk exposed population. So governance also a major driver that forces people to be displaced and migrated. Poor and marginalized people, sometimes they don't have social networks and economic choices, but they do they're forced to migrate it, and they mostly rely on local economic base, local ecosystem and environmental services. So we need to restore this local economy base, local ecosystem and local environmental services so that they think before when they migrate. We also should provide special concern to the trapped population, particularly women, children, and disabled people, because they don't have other option, stay and starve. If we don't care about them, then they are becoming more exposed to the vulnerable situation and will starve in the unsafe location. There is a policy suggestion or recommendation to our national governments to expand social safety net to the trapped population and climate change risk exposed populations so that they can develop their alternative livelihoods and also can support their daily needs and requirements. And we also should undertake proper rehabilitation measures or rehabilitation policy and mechanism to support rehabilitation of the climate change migrants or potential migrants in the local context, or maybe to the other areas. We are trying to say that the rehabilitation could be ex situ also, not in situ. If we equip people with proper skills and knowledge, then they can migrate to their preferred areas and can have a good job, can have better ways. This is a kind of ex situ migration also. We also can support ex situ rehabilitation through building their skills and capacity. I think I covered most of my presentation. I tried to explain the causes of climate change induced displacement migration based on our study, and try to highlight particular vulnerabilities of the particular segment of population and try to focus the human rights based perspective of displacement migration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Doha, for that very informative presentation. We are running a bit late than planned for the question and answer session. So what we will do is, while waiting for you to include your questions under the chat box, I'm going to say, I'm going to put a few questions forward to our two speakers so that they can start answering them. So in both of your presentations, I noticed there are certain similarities that we focused on. For example, the food systems. One is about how the food is not available due to climate change impacts, or the agriculture sector has been impacted, which has caused people to migrate. But then there's also the question of when they move to urban areas, how are they going to be provided with food security? So I wanted to ask, what are the experiences you have or the suggestions from the global and national work that you've been doing that focuses on this aspect? So that's first question. And it's also very similar to the livelihood. So people lose livelihoods, so they decide to migrate, or they go in search of jobs to urban areas. What do you call it? How assured is it that they get work there? Because in Sri Lanka, in the work that we've been doing, we've noticed that people migrate in search of work when the agriculture is impacted, but not necessarily do they have the skills to do the work that's available in urban areas. So in those instances, how is their situation? So if you could answer these two questions together, each one, both of you, if possible, in 2 minutes, so we have space for more questions. Thank you. Sandra, would you like to go first?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to congratulate Mr. Doha for your presentation, which was so interesting, and I'd love to engage somehow, and hopefully what we've done on the global level could somehow help at the local level. Now, to answer the question, I think that the lack of food systems in rural areas means that there is no food in cities, right? Or the food gets imported from other countries or other continents. So what COVID exposed is that we have a globalized food system that is not self-sustainable at the local level where the crisis like COVID happens. So the problem of lack of jobs in rural areas is also a problem of lack of jobs in the urban areas. And that's why I quoted E.T. Schumacher, and that has been defined 49 years ago. So I think what normally happens is that this rural migration ends up in peri-urban areas and in informal settlements. Some people make it, and there's probably some statistics that IO can provide, but effectively the fate, not of every person is that successful. Yeah. So the problem of peri-urbanity, informal settlements, land use becomes really, really important to find solutions. That's why I also spoke about creating new jobs, but not necessarily, if not in the cities, then in peri-urban and rural areas through some sort of alternative manufacturing strategies. Yeah. Maybe I could pass over to Mr. Doha.
Yes, thank you very much, Sandra, for your nice comment. And in fact, the nexus between rural and urban migration is an interplay of pull and push factors. And pull factors in urban context, this is job. And push factor, of course, as we are talking about climate change, this is climate change. But the impacts of climate change in rural areas, particularly affecting the agricultural potentialities and agricultural activities. The other thing is water crisis related to food crisis, and also health crisis. In southern part of the country, water crisis is severe, and this also agriculture. This also causing problem to the agricultural activities and production. So people are increasingly being forced to be migrated to the urban areas or urban settlements. And fortunately, in Bangladesh, the urban settlements are growing. This is not that government is creating job. Bangladesh experiences a growth-less job. You know that Bangladesh will becoming a developing country by 2024. Our growth is around 7.5. GDP growth is 7%, even more than that. But this is jobless growth. So the informal sectors in Bangladesh, particularly in the urban areas, is booming. Informal sector means we have many people, huge service sectors, and all are self-created. Rickshaw puller, shopkeeper, construction worker, even a tempo driver, they all constitute informal sectors. So more than 80% employment is in informal sector. There are many problems in informal sector also, because there is no job security, and this is not quality job. And in the context of COVID, the informal sector is collapsing, particularly. And if we if we shed light on other issues, I mean the migrants people, as they are employed in the informal sector, and many of them are employed in RMGs, ready-made garments industries. And again, this is not quality job. They live on hand to mouth. There is no job security. And due to COVID, maybe 50% of RMG exporting garments will be collapsed, maybe temporarily. This will lead huge employment of women, rural women, migrated women in particular. So migration in terms of rural and urban migration, though this is climate change induced, but the economy of urban sector plays a vital role. If urban sector economy doesn't work properly, then it will create another problem, and it will not facilitate any migration. So in one hand, we have to keep our urban sector employments healthy, and also with creating new jobs, with more stimulus packages maybe. And also we also should continue our agricultural production, because during this crisis time, our government is saying that agriculture is our backbone. So we should ensure that no land is vacant without any agricultural activities. So we also should keep agricultural activities increasing.
Right. Thank you, Doha, and thank you, Sandra. We have a lot of questions typed in. I hope we can take 50 minutes extra to take the questions. Otherwise, it would be unfair for the participants. So could we have the questions that are there on the screen? And then maybe you could check the question that relates to you and answer. So if we can have the first question on the screen. Right, it's for Sandra.
Could you, what could be some measures to focus as crucial links for urban rural migration? I think, thank you, Dennis. I would probably go back to the two aspects that I already said, and I'm sorry if I am repeating myself again, is the question of localized production that my previous speaker spoke as well, whether revisiting the food chain but from rural areas to urban areas in the vicinity of the city, say within the 25 kilometers of metropolitan areas, for example, could be looked at also within the national strategies of the country. So we're thinking metropolitan areas, regional areas, and then the national areas. And I think that understanding the capacity, the arable capacity of the land as well, what can be produced locally, what we have to import, I think becomes really crucial, fundamental as link between urban rural areas. Now, the peri-urban area could be an area also for experimentation. Some countries connected the peri-urbanity with climate change strategies in terms of producing buffer zones, for example. So they become a green buffer zones. They are great for absorbing carbon. They are lungs of the city. And I think these peri-urban areas can have a multifunctional role of perhaps receiving migration, having less formal employment strategies there as well, working as a connector, but at the same time become a buffer zone for cities, which I think it's an opportunity. Studies need to be carried out. Because unfortunately, as I've mentioned, we speak about rural areas or urban areas, but not the connection in between. So I think that's why I think they're so significant. Thank you.
On the screen. Right. So what is our level of preparedness for slow onset related, especially? I think this is for Doha.
Yes, thank you. In fact, we don't have enough preparation for slow onset events, particularly sea level rise and also salinity, to some extent drought, but there are some agricultural innovation, particularly salinity tolerant varieties and salinity tolerant vegetable cultivations. But the slow onset event, in fact, the intensity of salinity is increasing because the agriculture innovation, they can sustain maybe 10 ppt salinity, but if salinity continues to increase, maybe 15 ppt or 20 ppt, then agriculture activities will not be a potential option in those areas. So this is more harmful than the sudden onset event, I guess. And in terms of loss and damage, slow onset events causes more loss and damages than the sudden onset event, and this loss is permanent. This loss is irreversible. So in terms of preparedness, our preparedness is not that much.
To both the speakers, discuss migration during the time of COVID. Do you want to add in one word, not one word, rather 1 minute, your opinion? Because I think both of you referred to this aspect in your presentation. But if you could just quickly address this in 1 minute.
Should I?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. In fact, if you consider the causes of COVID-19 and climate change, this is different. There is no causal relationship between COVID-19 and climate change. But impact level, there are many similarities. And also when he talks about policy response, there is also many similarities between COVID-19 and also climate change. But the nexus between COVID-19 and climate-induced disasters is reverse. Reverse in that sense, from Bangladesh, women and also men migrated from the coastal areas. They came to the urban areas and got jobs. So urban employment, urban opportunities acted as a pull factor of migration from the climate hotspots to the moderately safer areas. But due to COVID-19, the jobs are becoming scanty, and more people or more climate migrants already become jobless. So they again are forced back to their homes of origin. So the migration is here, I think, would be reversed. I mean, COVID-19 forcing people to be migrated. Once they are migrated from the urban, from the rural areas, again they are forcing people to back migration or reverse migration from the urban areas to the rural areas. The problem is that in the rural areas, they don't have any employment opportunities. They don't have any agricultural activities, because most of the women, when they migrate from the rural areas to urban areas for garments job or informal sector job, they don't consider that they will go back to their homes and origin and can get a similar job. So that's that's the problem. So displacement and migration is a kind of reverse due to COVID-19.
Can I just do a postscriptum on building back better? If we have an opportunity to do something else, something different. And maybe, Voshita, you could join us in this dialogue on building back better post-COVID-19, because I hold in my hands these different policies that various people over a period of years and collaboration with over 100 stakeholders produced at the global level through various agencies such as UN Habitat. And last year we produced a policy with UNCCD, and there is an amazing work done on adaptation through UNFCCC program. How we connect this knowledge and solutions that have been put forward are on paper to solutions on the ground, to regional cities, to mayors that actually can, and city governance, local governments, that actually can deliver this change on the ground, because the ideas of how we could solve these problems are there. But we have problem with connection these global normative recommendations to the regional level. And for years, we've been looking for mayors who would like to work on these proposals, because we continue discussing similar problematics over and over again. And we lack the implementation of these global recommendations. That's my conclusion. What do you think?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting that you brought it up, because our next webinar is going to focus on how the knowledge sharing could happen to help address climate migration and displacement. So I'm going to become some spokesperson for Knowledge Work Program as an option, maybe, because they have different partners who are linked under one platform. And then there are also knowledge portals that are there that could contribute. But then the online process in itself is not sufficient. You need partnerships where we bring in different actors together. One of the questions that I had jotted down was, what is the role of local actors? For example, the state level, whether it's up to them to address the question of rural and urban migration, or whether it needs to be a national level action that goes down, trickling down effect to the local level. But I think we can have a wider discussion on this in the next one, and we'd be very happy to have you again contributing, at least from the floor. Thank you for bringing it, and we are running out of time, so shall we take one more question and then we'll close the webinar. If we can have one more question on the screen. Right. So this would be the final one. So I think that's a discussion around adaptation and then loss and damage, and how migration and displacement relate to these two. So I'll give, maybe if you can answer in 1 minute, because we're really short of time. Yes, and maybe add your closing remarks as well for both of you, if you can take the time to answer this one.
Okay. Yes, thank you. There are many debates around. I mean, mass migration or migration could be termed as adaptation strategy or not. Sometimes I don't agree with this because the migration not only internal, migration is also cross-border, and we cannot feed cross-border migration under adaptation strategy unless the global adaptation strategy accepts the axis to migration beyond the border, adaptation beyond the border. So we can accept migration under adaptation strategy. Then this is the responsibility of national government to accept all the migrated people and ensure their rehabilitation. There is a policy debate why climate change induced migrants created or forced by global issues or global problem, then national governments should take all the responsibilities. Maybe they will be supported with money, but money is not the answer of all problem. The another thing is that many population or many continents like Maldives, like small islands, they will not have any territory. So if they consider migration as an adaptation strategy, where they will find land to support rehabilitation of those migrated and displaced people. So my concern is that, yes, this could be adaptation strategy, but adaptation should extend its definition. Adaptation could be not within the boundary, but also the scope of outside of the boundary, access to adaptation. Thank you.
For me, in principle, I think that adaptation is not a solution to migration, and I would probably put efforts into rebuilding, rehabilitating, restoring our planet as a plan A. Obviously, in cases like Maldives, we know that the small islands are purchasing land in other countries, such as in India or somewhere else in New Zealand, and then we have the issue of cultural adaptation in general, which I think is also very important. Thank you. That was 1 minute, hopefully. Thank you for having me, Vishita.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
1 second, just before we finish, just want to add, actually, Sandra, you and I are both part of this process, the Resilience Frontiers program, which is talking about beyond borders and how adaptation could be transboundary as well. So I think we are looking towards a discussion like that. I think, Doha, what you're saying is being taken into consideration, and we might see things happening in the coming months with more details on how this could be brought into a larger discussion. So thank you everyone for joining us on webinar platform as well as Facebook, and thank you to the two speakers for their time and the experiences and knowledge they shared. Bye for now, till the next webinar.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.